I met an alien girl who looked exactly like the one in my dreams. Daniel Carter had been dreaming about her for 3 years, and every night she appeared in his sleep with the same silver hair that fell like moonlight down her shoulders, and those eyes that shifted between violet and deep blue like galaxies in motion, and he never understood why this woman haunted his dreams until the day humanity made first contact with the Valorians. The alien ship appeared over New York City on a Tuesday morning, and the world held its breath as the massive vessel descended through the clouds, and everyone expected something dramatic or terrifying. But instead, a single transport pod landed in Central Park, and when the hatch opened, Daniel was watching. The live broadcast from his apartment and his coffee cup slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor. Because stepping out of that pod was her, and the woman from his dreams was real. She wore a suit that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, and her silver hair moved as if it had its own gravity. And those impossible eyes scanned the crowd of soldiers and diplomats and reporters who had gathered. And Daniel knew with absolute certainty that he had to meet her, and something deeper than logic pulled at his chest and told him this was why he had been dreaming about her, and this was destiny written in the fabric of reality itself. He ran from his apartment and pushed through the streets toward Central Park, and security was tight. But Daniel had worked as a linguist for the United Nations, and his credentials got him past the outer barriers, and he could see her now standing in the center of a group of officials, and she was speaking in a voice that sounded like music and like wind chimes and like something his soul recognized. The alien woman whose name the translator devices rendered as Lyra was explaining that the Valorians had been observing humanity for decades, and that they had sent scouts to study human culture and consciousness. And Daniel pushed forward through the crowd, and when he was close enough he called out to her without thinking, and said her name, even though no one had spoken it. Yet Lyra turned, and her eyes locked onto Daniel. And for a moment, the entire world seemed to stop, and the crowd fell silent, and she walked toward him with steps that seemed to glide rather than touch the ground. And when she stood before him, she reached out one hand and touched his face and spoke in perfect English that bypassed all translation devices. "You have been dreaming of me," she said. And it was not a question. Daniel nodded because his voice had abandoned him, and Lyra smiled, and it was the same smile from 1,000 dreams. And she explained that the Valorians possessed a form of consciousness that could reach across space and time, and that she had been assigned to study Earth and specifically to study him, and in the process of observing his mind across the vast distance between their worlds, she had accidentally created a neural bridge, and her consciousness had been visiting his dreams. The officials surrounding them demanded answers and protocols and procedures, but Lyra ignored them all, and she took Daniel's hand and pulled him away from the crowd, and no one dared to stop them, because there was something in her bearing that suggested she was not to be trifled with. And they walked together through Central Park, while Daniel tried to process the impossibility of his situation. Lyra explained that the Valorians had been watching humanity with great interest because humans possessed something rare in the universe, and humans had an extraordinary capacity for imagination and emotional depth that most species had long ago evolved away from in favor of pure logic and efficiency. And she said that humanity was at a crossroads, and that the choices made in the coming years would determine whether Earth joined the greater galactic community or destroyed itself in isolation. Daniel asked why she had chosen him, and why his dreams had become entangled with hers. And Lyra paused beneath an old oak tree, and looked at him with those galaxy eyes, and said that consciousness was not as individual as humans believed, and that minds could resonate across vast distances when they shared certain frequencies. And she had been drawn to his mind, because he dreamed in colors and emotions that her people had forgotten. And through him, she had remembered what it meant to feel wonder. Over the following weeks, Daniel became Lyra's guide to humanity, and she wanted to understand human art and music and literature and all the messy emotional things that made humans simultaneously beautiful and chaotic. And Daniel showed her museums and concerts and introduced her to poetry, and she absorbed everything with a hunger that seemed almost desperate. And she told him that her people had traded passion for progress centuries ago, and they had become immortal and powerful, but empty. The world watched their unlikely friendship with fascination and fear, and some called Daniel a traitor for growing close to an alien being, and others called him a bridge between worlds and governments, demanded access to Lyra, and wanted to study her technology and make treaties and alliances, but Lyra refused all formal contact beyond basic diplomatic courtesies, and she said she had come to Earth for one reason, and that reason was standing in front of her. Daniel fell in love with her slowly and then all at once, and he knew it was insane to love an alien being whose very biology was different from his own. But love had never been logical, and Lyra seemed to feel something similar, though she struggled to name it because Valorians had words for many things, but they had lost the words for love, somewhere in their evolution toward perfection. One night they sat on the roof of Daniel's apartment building and looked up at the stars, and Lyra pointed to a constellation and said that was where her world orbited, and that it was a cold, perfect place where nothing unexpected ever happened, and where everyone lived for thousands of years without ever truly feeling alive. And she said that in 3 months of knowing Daniel, she had felt more than she had in 3 centuries of existence. Daniel asked what would happen when her mission ended and when she had to return to her people, and Lyra was silent for a long time. And then she said that the Valorian High Council expected her to return and deliver her findings about humanity and help them decide whether Earth was worthy of contact and protection, or whether humans were too dangerous and chaotic to be allowed into the wider galaxy. The thought of losing her made Daniel's chest ache, and he realized that this woman from his dreams had become the center of his waking world. And he asked if she would stay if she could, and Lyra turned to him, and her eyes were filled with something that looked like tears, though they glowed with soft light, and she said that she had already made her choice and that she would rather live one human lifetime filled with messy emotions and beautiful chaos than return to an eternity of empty perfection. But there were complications because the Valorian Council sent word that Lyra was to return immediately and bring her assessment of humanity, and their ships appeared in orbit like silver moons and demanded her return, and Lyra stood before the assembled nations of Earth and made her report, and she told the Council that humanity was dangerous and irrational and completely unpredictable, and also that humanity was the most alive species she had encountered, and that they loved and created and dreamed with an intensity that had been lost to most of the galaxy. She recommended that the Valorians establish protective contact with Earth and share technology slowly while learning from humanity, rather than simply observing, and she said that humans had something precious that advanced species needed to remember, and the Council deliberated for 3 days while the world held its breath. The decision came through official channels, and the Valorians agreed to Lyra's proposal, and they would establish an embassy on Earth and share knowledge and technology in exchange for something more valuable. And they wanted humans to teach them how to feel again, and how to dream, and how to create art. That meant something beyond technical perfection. Lyra was granted permission to remain on Earth as the first ambassador, and she would serve as a bridge between the two peoples. And when she heard the news, she found Daniel in Central Park, where they had first truly met, and she told him that she was staying and that her dreams would now be their dreams. Daniel held her close and realized that the universe was stranger and more beautiful than he had ever imagined, and that sometimes destiny reached across the stars in the form of dreams, and sometimes love meant finding someone who was willing to trade eternity for a single lifetime of real connection. They stood together beneath the autumn sky and watched as Valorian ships began their descent to establish the first permanent alien presence on Earth, and Daniel knew that everything was about to change and that humanity would never be the same, and neither would the Valorians. And maybe that was the point, and maybe growth only happened when different worlds collided and learned from each other. Lyra squeezed his hand and smiled that smile from 1,000 dreams, and Daniel smiled back. And together they walked toward a future where the line between alien and human would blur, and where two species would learn from each other, and where a man who dreamed in colors would help an immortal woman remember what it meant to be truly alive.